So yeah, we're seeing these stories more and more every day now. This is from my newsletter last night. I just want to remind folks, it was just in March when we saw a woman in Georgia arrested for her miscarriage. And the only reason those charges were dropped was because of a sustained public outrage here online. And it was just a few days ago that I told you about a woman in Texas who spent 5 months in jail over her miscarriage. It took them 5 months to admit, yeah, I guess you didn't do anything wrong. You just had a miscarriage in a public restroom. And now here we are in Toledo, Ohio. Same story. One of the things I wrote about in the newsletter last night and that I write about in general is the way that these cases follow a very specific pattern. And if you know what to look out for, you will start to see this everywhere. You'll notice that the charges are almost always something like abuse of a corpse or abandoning a dead body. That's because they can't arrest someone with miscarriage. They can't arrest you for disposing of a miscarriage in a way I don't like, because there are no laws on how to dispose of a miscarriage, nor should there be. Even if police suspect that someone didn't have a miscarriage but had an abortion, they can't charge them with abortion, even if you live in an anti-abortion state. That's because states, at least right now, don't allow for the prosecution of abortion patients. And so what happens is that these police officers, these prosecutors are so desperate to punish people for their pregnancy outcomes that they find these ways around that prohibition on charging miscarriage and abortion patients, and they charge them with something like abuse of a corpse instead. The other thing that these cases have in common, and this is often how I find these stories to begin with, is that local media treats them like crime stories. They run really sensationalized headlines, inaccurate headlines. This is one of the headlines this week in Ohio: baby found. Here's another one from Ohio: infant found. Even when the coroner's report was released this week in this Ohio case, saying this was a miscarriage, this was non-viable, correctly calling it products of conception, local media continued to call it the remains of an infant. And I can't stress enough how important it is to call out these headlines, to call out your local paper if you see a headline like this, because they are aiding in the prosecution of people for their pregnancy outcomes. They're furthering the idea of fetal personhood, this notion that a embryo, fertilized egg, fetus is actually a person and should be treated as such. There's a reason that anti-abortion groups love headlines like that. And once you start to notice these patterns, you'll see them everywhere. The people targeted are most often from marginalized communities. They're poor, they're unhoused, they're women of color. You will see those connections everywhere. I have more about this story and other stories over at the newsletter. Please share it. Please pay attention. That way, when you see a headline like that or when you see one of these stories come up, you will know what's actually happening.